Taylor. I call the honourable member David Clean.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Kia ora. Mr Chair, I also want to make some remarks about the SOP 171, which seeks to retrospectively put right an error that was made by the government about 18 months ago. This, of course, has emerged from the High Court ruling, which was quite unequivocal. Justice Murray made it quite clear. He referred to the ban that had been in place, the smoking ban, as being unlawful, invalid and of no effect. That's a fairly robust statement from a justice. There's no room for equivocation in that. He went on to say that the judge believed it was well established in common law that prisoners retained all their civil rights unless specifically removed by law, and so the starting point was that they had the same rights as other citizens to smoke in their own homes. And for all intents and purposes, a cell is a prisoner's home, and that was, I guess, the key finding of the justice in this case. The issue of smoking in prisons was not overlooked at the time the Smoke-Free Environments Act came into force. Section 6A deals with that very thing. It says the superintendent of a prison must have a written policy which is posted. It must be based on the principles that, as far as is reasonably practical, and I'm quoting now, an employee or inmate who does not smoke or does not wish to smoke in the prison must be protected from smoke arising from smoking in prison cells. It also requires, where it's reasonably practical to do so, an inmate must not be forced to share a cell with an inmate who does smoke. So clearly it was not overlooked in the original legislation. The issue is, clearly, we support the intent to reduce the level of smoking in prisons. Smoking is it's an addiction. Nicotine is a very powerful dependency or addiction. Speaking as a reformed smoker, I know this, and I dare say there are others of us in that same situation. But the fact is that people do wish to smoke and choose to smoke. While we might seek to discourage them, it is clear that this ban was illegal, and the element of retrospectivity in this bill, this SOP, is what is particularly concerning. We will not always oppose amendments which seek to make retrospective change. I recall an example a year, perhaps 2 years ago, where, due to a drafting error in legislation, the validity of the rights of police officers, recently sworn in police officers, to exercise the duties and powers of a constable were brought into question. We very happily supported that. It was an unfortunate lapse in drafting, a rare one. We supported that for very good and obvious reasons. This, however, is clearly designed to protect the government from the consequences of any claims which might now be made against it on the basis of people who have clearly been denied their absolute legal right to smoke. And we've heard a little bit about Mr Arthur Taylor, the inmate who has successfully brought this case to the High Court. That same gentleman, if we may be so bold, put out a press release today, and I quote, "The government's hypocrisy is mind-blowing. It imprisons about 9,000 people for law-breaking, yet it demonstrates an abject disregard for the rule of law itself, a case of do as I say, not as I do. Such hypocrisy can only undermine Ms Tolley's own Corrections Department's rehabilitative efforts with many prisoners." We routinely hear from government benches the language of consequences. When we seek to protect the rights of prisoners, we are told prisoners are in there because it is the consequence of their action. This government knows it is vulnerable to claims from people who have been imprisoned, denied the right to smoke, and therefore they are seeking to avoid the consequences of their action. Isn't that interesting? I look forward to hearing from some of the more, shall I say, volatile spokespeople from the government on these issues of prisoners' rights. I won't name them just now. And to explain to me why the government should be protected from the consequences of its action when some of us would have, or some of them would have us insist that prisoners, inmates must suffer the consequences of theirs. It is unacceptable that this SOP would put that retrospective correction in place. It's a matter of debate, just how do we seek to reduce the level of smoking in prisons, which we acknowledge has been very high historically, not good for anyone's health. This is not the right mechanism. This is not the solution. We cannot support this SOP. Thank you.
Let's see. I'll call the Honourable